Madam Chairman, when you're ready.
Okay, well, let's call the meeting to order. I have two views here. I have our view and then another view in the corner, which has our view again. Oh, there we go. Gotcha. Okay. Maybe we can just do a quick round of introductions if you wouldn't mind, because there are a lot of people here and oops, we just lost you.
You're watching our broadcast feed as well, so it's going to be changing around a little bit. It'll never be the same.
Okay, so I'll just start. My name is Olivia Perry. I'm a senior planner in the Dane County Planning and Development Department, and I chair this committee. Mallory, you want to go next? Oh, your speaker.
Yeah, that always happens. Hi, I'm Mallory Gorman. I'm a tax attorney. I'm retired from Baker Tilly. Just joined the committee.
Thank you. Matthew? Matt?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Matthew Childress. I work at WIDA, and I'm here representing our tax credit program. I'm our tax credit manager.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca. I'm also with WIDA. I'm a Community and Economic Development Officer representing the central and southwest part of the state.
Great. Thank you. Mike? Should we just skip you?
Mike Z. Fitchburg here, Economic Development Director. I wasn't sure which mic to use.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Randy?
Randy Udell, alderperson for District 4, Seat 8.
Thank you, Randy. Michael Harrigan?
I'm Mike Harrigan, and I'm now with the HMA Advisors, and I'm going to be involved in the presentation of the second agenda item in the meeting this evening.
Thank you. Nathan?
Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Nathan Sims. I'm also with WIDA. I am the Director of Commercial Lending.
Thanks, Nathan. Marshall?
Hi, my name is Marshall Mertens, and I'm a resident here at Fitchburg, and I am a retired affordable housing developer with my experience in Washington State.
Thanks, Marshall. Julia?
I am Julia Ratafrata. I'm one of the alders for the city of Fitchburg, representing District 2.
Thank you. Steve? Steve, are you with us?
I am, yes, hi. I'm Steve Affelbacher. I'm with H&A Advisors. Mike and I are here for the second presentation to talk about the rent-to-own concept.
Great, thank you. Joe?
Joe Maldonado. I'm an alder for District 1 in Fitchburg.
Thanks. We have a call-in. Do you know who that is, Michael? Mike Z?
I don't recognize that number.
Yeah, good afternoon. This might be Sridhar Ranavat, 957-1800 number. So I'm with WIDA as well.
Yes.
Sorry, technical difficulties, so I'm calling in.
Thanks, Sridhar. Thanks for joining us. Mike, sure. Can we go to the council chambers? And you're too little, but I think I see you. Godwin?
Amagashi, I'm a member of the advisory committee.
And then Dorothy, are you there? No? Okay.
Brian McKee, I'm a home builder.
Brian would be great.
Brian McKee, I'm a home builder and developer. I'm also a constituent from District 4.
Thank you. Brian?
This is Brian Schemming. I'm a former Chief Operating Officer at WIDA and Administrator to the State Division of Housing.
Thank you. Joyce?
Joyce Fry, Economic Development Specialist, undercover here. So I just want to thank the alders that did join in today. We appreciated it. We appreciate that. And CETA members as well. Thank you.
And do we have everybody in the room, or is there someone else? In the council chamber?
Everybody.
Okay, all right, well, I'd like to second that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's great to see such a good showing, and thank you for putting this agenda together, Mike and Joyce. It's a really terrific agenda, and I'm looking forward to, yeah, participating in all of this, these presentations with you. Let's have the approval of minutes. Did everyone get a chance to look at the minutes? And if you did, do we have a motion to approve?
This is Brian, I'll move. Brian Schimming.
Great, thank you. And do we have a second?
Second, Godwin.
Godwin, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes have passed.
Madam Chair, could I, even though the minutes are passed, there was some items we wanted from the minutes. Are we going to have a report of what had taken place, or did you want?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure, Joyce, where did, or Mike, where did you want to do that?
We're going to report under the department number 7.
Oh, okay. Number 7, okay, that's good then.
But could we just take a quick step back because we didn't do roll call?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So Amagashi,
Here.
Clary, Gorman,
Here.
McKee, Mertens,
Here.
Perry, Schimming,
Here.
Walford. We have a quorum.
Thank you.
Is that a quorum?
So any public appearances for non-agenda items?
No one here in council chambers.
Anyone here on Zoom? Okay. So I think our next agenda item is the WIDA. And we have 4 members of WIDA. Thank you so much all for being here. And I will let you, Joyce or Mike, introduce. I'm not sure the order of the introduction, so I will let you introduce the folks from WIDA. Although they've already been introduced, but the presentation.
Yeah, I think Rebecca's going to kick it off from WIDA, and then she's going to hand it off to Matt after that. And they're going to share their respective screens as part of their presentation.
Okay, great.
Okay, and can everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got that up here too.
All right, I'm gonna get into presentation mode here. All right. Yes, thank you so much for allowing us to attend this meeting. I know Fitchburg is a very fast-growing community, and there are a lot of housing needs with workforce and affordable housing, as well as senior housing. And so again, my name is Rebecca. I'm a Community and Economic Development Officer for the central and southwest part of the state. And I'm joined by Nathan Sims, Matt Childress, and Sridhar Ranabar. And they, of course, are our experts in the tax credit. So I'm just going to kick it off with kind of an overview of housing tax credits. This part of the presentation will be pretty quick, so we can really get into kind of the meat of what was wanting to be discussed, which is some of the changes with our QAP and the scoring and how that can align with some of the plans that you have to move affordable housing forward in Fitchburg. And I do apologize if my dog barks throughout this. She thinks she's protective of the house, so when anyone walks past, she thinks it's necessary to bark at them. So apologies in advance. So the housing tax credits, and a lot of you are probably familiar with housing tax credits. So if so, this is just kind of a general overview. If this is new to you, it's a lot of information. So if you want more information, please connect with us through WIDA, and we can spend more time going through the program with you. But WIDA is the allocator of the federal housing tax credit program and the state housing tax credit program, which was created in 1986 for the federal programs to encourage private investment in developing and rehabbing rental housing for those with low to moderate incomes. So nearly $342 million has been awarded to date, creating and preserving more than 53,000 units of rental housing, which also helps target some of those vulnerable and special needs populations, such as seniors, veterans, and those experiencing homelessness or drug and alcohol abuse. The programs that we have, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about housing in Fitchburg, historically from 1994 through 2018, so this isn't counting last year's allocation that was awarded, there were 6 projects funded with housing tax credits for a total of 529 low-income rental units. 194 of those being for seniors, and then the remaining units being for just general use and families. Fitchburg has been very successful historically in housing tax credits. So essentially the tax credits are a dollar for dollar offset in a federal tax liability. So our developers apply for a tax credit, and if they are awarded a tax credit, those tax credits are then sold to an investor who purchases the credit, who then can get that tax liability reduced. And then the developer can build the development or rehab the development with a lower than normal debt load, which then allows them to offer lowered rents for those with low to moderate income, typically for the housing tax credit developments at 60% of county median income. So there are a few programs, and again, Sridhar and Nathan and Matt can chime in, but then they'll be really kind of taking it home with some of the changes and how these programs can align with your goals in Fitchburg. But there is the 9% federal. This is our competitive application process that is kind of the most sought after because it's the highest possible credit that can be given. The state of Wisconsin allocates about $15.5 million per year, and that's based on a state's population. So the more populated your state is, the more credits you get. And we have one allocation cycle per year. This year, applications are accepted between November 20th and December 11th for these 9% allocations. We then have a 4% federal program. This is a non-competitive program, and it's tied to our state's tax-exempt bond volume. So as long as the development can meet the minimum scoring threshold, that's what they're looking for to get the credit, not necessarily competing score-wise with the 9% developments, which are highly competitive. And there's a year-round allocation cycle for the 4% federal program. Lastly, we do also have a 4% state program, which was created in 2018, and it's again competitively awarded. We have about $7 million available each year, and it's designed to complement that federal 4% tax credit program to make those deals a little more attractive. And then moving into what kind of Matt will be talking about, we do have a new QAP. That's a qualified allocation plan. It's a document that spells out how developments are scored. It talks about our housing goals and how we've kind of arrived at some of our housing goals throughout the state. And then we also have how the scoring for 2021-22 QAP has changed and updated. All of these documents and links can be found on our website, which I can send out to Michael or Joyce, who can then share with the group. And then I'll just kind of finish up with, we know that tax credits isn't the only way that affordable housing can be done, especially when looking at those 9% deals. There's not enough credits for the demand that we have. So we also have multifamily financing, which Nathan and Sridhar can also discuss. Just a couple of examples are thrown up on the screen, but we do offer long-term fixed and variable rate financing that can be used for the construction, acquisition, and rehab for affordable housing. And then we have many other financing products that can be used for our developments. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and then of course any questions at this point can be asked, and then we can address those. I'll invite Nathan, Sridhar, and Matt to chime in with the questions. But if no questions at this point, we can jump into Matt's part of the presentation that will cover some of those changes in scoring and how that can align with your goals.
Do you have any questions, folks? Just raise your hand if you would. Anyone in the chamber? Okay. Should we continue? Thank you, Rebecca. That was a great summary. Oh, hold on. Julia has a question.
Yes, when you mentioned the tax-exempt bond financing, can municipality create their own tax-exempt bond? Like, can Fitchburg create that?
Yeah, this is Matt Childress at WIDA. We have an approval process that allows for local activity bonds, so you can go through and issue your own bonds and then be eligible at times to claim the 4% credit, so long as the minimum expenditure tests have been made. It introduces a bit of a lead time.
And do you have many communities participating, doing local activity bonds throughout the state?
I think in the last 2 years, we had one, and in the last 5 years, we probably had maybe 5. A lot of times it's just easy. We're just pretty good at issuing bonds, and I think people at times just find it to be an efficient process to rely upon WIDA.
Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, great. Matt, I think you're up next.
Sure, good afternoon. My name is Matt Childress. I'll be running through as quickly as possible a robust series of changes that we performed on our qualified allocation plan. Every 2 years, the state of Wisconsin will identify our big picture housing goals, and then we'll perform underlying changes to the scoring and the threshold requirements. So unfortunately, I don't have as nice of a presentation prepared as Rebecca today, but I do have a PDF that has a lot of nuts and bolts, and we can absolutely share that with you. This was a document that we prepared in the middle of the summer as we were getting ready to put the finishing touches on the QAB, but I find it successful to foster a discussion. So I'm gonna start with that document, bring it up on the screen right now. And like I said, I'm gonna do my best to just kind of run through it. I know it's gonna take a bit of time, but if Olivia or somebody else could foster a Q&A, like feel free to stop me if you see something come up in the chat room or if you have a question. Other than that, I would ask that people just keep the majority of the questions to the end because it is going to take a bit of time to just run through it. So with that, I'm just going to jump right in. I might make it a little bit bigger. Can I get a thumbs up if you guys can see it on the screen okay? Okay, good. So these are the 16 scoring categories for the new QAP. I'm going to focus on ones at a very high level that we modified. We made changes to our energy efficiency category number 2. We introduced a new scoring category here, number 7, the veterans housing. We made some pretty significant tweaks to how we calculate financial leverage, and that's the category where we want you to be efficient in your credit use fewer of our tax credit resource so we can put more dots on the map, create more units throughout the state. We made some fairly robust changes to our development team category to incentivize the inclusion of emerging developers. We made some minor modifications to our areas of economic opportunity and also our rural areas without recent housing tax credit awards. And then these last two here are workforce housing communities and community service facilities. These are new categories to this year. And then you might see that in the past, we had a zoning 12-point scoring option. That's not there anymore. That's still something that's very important to us. We've just moved it to a core threshold requirement. So that's the view from 10,000 feet. Now I'm gonna jump in a little more detailed. In the energy efficiency and sustainability category, we've always offered points for being green and efficient. But now what used to get you points, we're moving to a core threshold requirement, i.e. if you want to be a project in the tax credit program, we're going to make you be energy efficient. But if you want to score points now, you have to be even more efficient. So there's a green built home standard. It used to be 150 would score you points. Now you have to score 200 if you want the points. Wow. And just to meet threshold, you got to score 150. Walk score, we've gotten rid of those points. There were opportunities for redundancy in our areas of economic opportunity category. And we'll walk through what some of those are, but a lot of the walk score was dependent on proximity to amenities. And that's the same kind of thing that we give points for in our areas of economic opportunity. So we didn't want to have point scoring redundancy. It's not that we don't think it's not very important. The existing public transportation points were increased from 4 to 5. And we used to give points if you had a non-smoking development. We upped the ante. We're just going to say that's a threshold requirement. You have to be a non-smoking development. Here's one of the other new categories, veterans housing. It used to be it was tied in as a bonus point option in our supportive housing category. And what we were seeing in practice was that those units had to be at 30% CMI or lower. And we interviewed a bunch of veterans advocacy groups. And what happens is a lot of our veterans are actually income qualified out of that 30,000 or 30% CMI band. And on average, I think in Dane County, if you're a 30% unit, you might be around $19,000 for a one bedroom. A lot of the just benefits that veterans get were income qualifying them out of being able to live in those units. We actually broke it out and put it in its own scoring category now, where you can go up to 60% or lower. And it doesn't mean you can't go lower, it's just giving more options. And it's something that we want to collect more data on as we continue to construct these units and be able to track outcomes and metrics. And we'll continue to keep an eye on that 60% threshold and see if that's appropriate and make minor modification as required once we get more data. Financial leverage, again, that's where we go and we look at how many annual credits are you asking WIDA for. We want to make sure you only need as many as it takes to get the deal done. We do a gap analysis, an equity gap. You have all these other sources. What do you really need from us? And the fewer that you use, you'll get higher score. So that's something that we continue to appreciate and endeavor. But in the future, if you're a rural community, this might not be as applicable to Fitchburg per se, but a lot of the very small townships that need affordable housing have a hard time being efficient with credits. So we introduced a secondary scoring rung just for those projects that qualify under the rural housing set aside. Development team, we got rid of our occupancy percentage points. What we were seeing is that a lot of our tax credit developments are highly sought after with very long waiting lists, and a lot of people were scoring very, very high. So there wasn't a lot of stratification in scoring. So we just removed that. And then there's a big mission component at WIDA right now to incentivize the inclusion of emerging, newer developers into our ownership structure and development structure. So now if you have an application that includes a minority developer or co-developer with an ownership stake, we've actually introduced point scoring options there. And then also it used to be if you were a brand new developer, you could get 1 bonus point. Now we've increased that to up to 2 points. And the things that we're looking here are, we're trying to do 2 things, bring new developers in, but then with these different options for points, we're introducing the idea of opportunities for partnerships or even development triangles, where you might see a for-profit developer, a nonprofit, and a new emerging developer team up. And we like to believe we've made some structural changes that will formally incentivize these types of rehabilitation projects and new construction projects in that structure. I touched on this earlier. We used to give points for permissive zoning. Now it's just core threshold. We analyzed the last 2 years of awards, and every single person who got an award got those points. So again, we like to evaluate the efficacy of offering points. If every single project gets the points, there's no stratification. We're just going to move it to a minimum requirement at that point. Areas of economic opportunity. This is where we like to incentivize the construction of developments in areas with higher economic opportunities. We look at that in a number of different ways. We'll look at it from a census tract level, a school district level. We look at it from income levels and proximity to amenities, like how close are you to a clinic, a grocery store, a library, things like that, so that we can find good outcomes for our tenants, because at the end of the day, the goal is to enrich the lives of the tenants living in our projects. We have 2 obligations here: build the units, but then also make sure that we get good outcomes from the tenants who are living in those units. And then finally, the low unemployment rate category, we eliminated that. It's not that low unemployment rate isn't important to us. We've introduced some workforce housing community point scoring options. I'll get to those very shortly. And again, it was an opportunity for redundancy. So if we get rid of the points in this category, it will elevate the worth of those workforce housing community points that we see later on. Rural areas without recent housing tax credit awards. It used to be if you're in a county and you hadn't seen any WIDA subsidy in the form of tax credits in the past 3 years, we'd offer up some points. Same idea. I always say, put a map of Wisconsin up on the wall. We like to put as many dots on the map and in as many communities as possible. Because an overarching theme in our program that didn't used to be part of our program is there's a need for affordable housing everywhere in the state. It used to be a lot of communities would come to us and say, we don't want that type of housing. And instead, we're getting a lot of warm embraces from communities recently saying, yes, we like affordable housing. It is a key determinant in our citizens' health and progression and economic viability. So with that said, we're going out 5 years now instead of 3, and we're increasing the amount of points up to 8 to try and serve some of these counties that we've had a hard time building developments in. And then, like I said, we have a new category here. It's workforce housing communities. And these are things where we're focusing on 3 things: top job centers, net job growth, and individual job growth. And you might say, you know, well, how do I know how I get points? We tried to make it as easy as possible for you. If you go out to the 2021 allocating page on WIDA.com, there's an appendice that tells exactly who qualifies for points by municipality or census tract. Finally, community service facilities. There's a carve out within the IRS Section 42 code that allows you to include eligible basis. Eligible basis is costs that generate tax credits. So you can include up to 25% of those costs into your eligible basis if you qualify as a community service facility. This is important to WIDA right now. We want to be looking at ways to enrich the lives of our tenants, but also make an impact in our communities, specifically in times of pandemic. So if there was an option where the IRS code is affording this opportunity, we're just putting 5 points behind it now to hopefully have people think about how they do their housing developments differently. Maybe there are opportunities to have a community service facility that's a benefit to not only the residents, but the community as well. And then I'll give some brief background on our state 4% tax credit. That's the tax credit program that Rebecca described that we started in 2018. So we used to have a bunch of optional additional scoring categories, and we've removed the readiness to proceed. I talked about the reasons why we're getting rid of those, but we also used to have location-based point scoring options. We got rid of those. For the first time in the history of the program, we're gonna do set-aside carve-outs within the state 4% program, and a lot of those are more location in theory. So we don't need a point structure to drive development that way anymore. Now we're doing it at macro level in the form of the set-aside approach. And like I said, I talked about it. We're gonna have 25% of our credits set aside in the rural set-aside, and then we're gonna do 20% in a part where we're defining it as small urban. And if you're rural, you need to be greater than 25 miles away from a population center and fewer than 10,000 residents. And if you're small urban, there's 2 tests we make you meet: greater than 25 miles from a population and greater than 10, or 1,000 residents, or less than 25 miles and less than 10,000 residents. And again, you might say, how do I figure that out? We try to make it easy on you. Just go out to WIDA.com. There's an appendice that clearly defines who's eligible for participation by municipality. 2 big high-level tax credit things that we're looking at are our supportive housing. That's where we're creating units where people are either homeless or prone to homelessness. And it used to be you had to evidence to us 50% vouchers at time of application. So dedicated, committed vouchers upfront for half your units. We've seen this in practice as a successful way to underwrite deals, but we've seen it in practice as a barrier to entry in our supportive housing set-aside. People have good concepts, good ideas, they just can't get that far along in the voucher assessment. So we've dialed it back a little bit. We're looking at more of an integrated approach. If you can evidence a minimum of 25% of your total units with dedicated vouchers, you can be deemed eligible to be participating in our supportive housing set aside. And then finally, we're carving out 10% of our credits in an innovative housing set aside. It's going to be a special competition that's held late spring of 2021. And we're kicking off discussions right now as to what type of additional scoring criteria we're going to look at implementing. We're going to look at a number of different things with the thought that most likely it's going to be our standard scoring with a series of more subjective scoring options, where if you're a project that typically just can't get over the hump in our normal tax credit round, but everybody kind of agrees that this is a good project and these are the kinds of things that are being innovative and catalytic in our communities, we'll give you another option to win a 9% tax credit award. And like I said, we're hoping to have the scoring done by the end of the year with an award announcement, hopefully by next May, 2021. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm going to try and go through these administrative changes as quickly as possible and then open it up to questions. In the 9% round, it used to be you could go up to $1.55 million of annual credit request. What we were seeing in practice is that a lot of very large deals gobble up the credit in a very quick manner under that structure. So we're gently rolling it back to 1.4 million in 2021 with an eye towards 2022 being a second reduction. I know a lot of our development and a lot of our municipalities spend a lot of time putting deals together. So we didn't want to be too reactionary and jump to a lower figure right away. But again, the thought process is if we can artificially restrict the credit ask, we can make more awards to more communities and do even more units. This is a pretty big change in our program for state of 4% program. If you qualify under the rural set aside or the small urban set aside, we're actually going to give you more state housing tax credits than you used to be eligible for. It used to be whatever you qualified in the federal for is exactly what you qualified in the state for. If you're one of these two set asides, we're going to multiply up that credit amount using the credit rate, and you'll end up with a higher level of subsidy. And we have a sample application on our website for the upcoming round, so don't be too scared by the math component. Hopefully the application will just do it for you. And if you get stuck, always feel free to reach out to commercial lending directly. This is something that Rebecca touched on. We used to have 2 rounds for our program, a 9% round open in late November, due mid-December, and then another one open in January for the state round, due mid-January. We're aligning the universes, trying to get everybody pulling in the same direction, and we're gonna have both rounds open. Per what Rebecca was saying, it's gonna be late November, it opens the window, with them due in early to mid-December. Committed funds, we used to say you had to have 85% committed funds at time of application. We're dialing that back down to 80%. We understand that there's always going to be a bit of a mismatched administrative burden on these programs. Everyone's chasing every source they can possibly find, but it's next to impossible to get all the commitments to line up at the same time. So we're dialing it back from 85 down to 80% to give more flexibility and more opportunities to be creative and source more non-traditional affordable housing debt sources. The 9% program carryover deadline, it used to be 120 days from reservation. You'd have to give us our second review. We're adding 60 days into that process. It's the same concept. We know you're struggling at times to get home awards, federal home loan bank commitments in place, WEDC state historic tax contracts, things like that. And we're trying to be cognizant that our deadline sometimes occurs earlier than others' deadlines. So we're moving it back to try and align the universes as best we can. AIA guaranteed max cost contract. We do this in the spirit of cost containment. We don't like to see overages. We want agreed upon some upfront, and we're firmly defining what form of contract. It's the AIA 102. Construction start deadlines. This is administrative again. Every July 31st of the subsequent year, both programs will have to show evidence to us they started construction. I touched on it with WEDC. We're not going to require the historic tax contract anymore. We're just going to make evidence that you turned in and applied for Part 2 with the National Park Service. This is a pretty big one. During the competition, if you make a threshold requirement failure, we're going to have a 5-day predefined period where you can cure that mistake. Every year we see upwards of 10 deals get kicked out for things from going over our maximum cost model to failing to sign the application to, just things come up every year. And the thought process is the more ways we find to say yes to keeping people in an application period, the better outcomes we're going to get, the better projects we're going to get. So that's a pretty big change. And then on the monitoring side, tax credits, we're taking a hard look at our compliance fee schedule. The IRS is requiring some more robust inspection requirements. So on the operating side, we might have a modestly increased operating figure. We're going to incorporate the Violence Against Women Act into our tax credit compliance manual. We will not allow mid-lease rent increases on tax credit developments. And these are the last two. On supportive housing, we give you points within our application. You're supposed to be working with DHS to develop a waiting list to help and find tenants that need access to supportive services. And we always say you have to hold the unit vacant for 30 days. After that, you can go to the open population base. We're going to create a simple one-page form for the property managers to prove to us that they adequately marketed the unit and lets our property managers staff behind the scenes do compliance on that. And then finally, the last thing is when we get to the end of a project, there's always some negotiation and oversight opportunities where people promise to do certain things from a construction perspective, like do low profile transitions or roll in showers or rocker style light switches. And without fail, 1 out of 5 of our projects, we have to do either remediation efforts or a bunch of negotiating with our development partners to come to a resolution. And we're going to try and get ahead of it and make sure that the inspecting architect at construction starts as the plans contemplate what's required. And then at stabilization, before all the money's been paid out, they'll get another statement to us that says, yes, all of those elements were incorporated. So with that, I'm going to take a pause on sharing my screen. I apologize for kind of dominating discussion there for a moment, but I'd love to open it to questions.
Thank you, Matt. That was very comprehensive. And I don't know how familiar everyone is with the scoring from last year, but there are some significant changes, and it seems like there's some really amazing, wonderful, things that you guys are innovating and doing, and I'm really grateful for that. I don't know what kind of response you're getting from the development community, but that would be, I'm sure on many fronts it's positive, and especially in the more rural areas of the state. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any specific questions? I mean, I think that there's a lot of things here that are very interesting. I guess since we're Dane County residents, maybe you could talk a little bit about the change with the rural in terms of I know you have it in your appendix or the index to determine what communities are eligible and not. But I think, are there some communities in Dane County that are eligible for the rural set aside?
Not off the top of my head. I'm not sure if Dane County is eligible for the rural, but what we've seen in recent years is when the state tax credit program wasn't brought into fruition, was that we doubled our unit production in terms of sheer volume. So we used to produce maybe 1,300 units a year. We were seeing upwards of 2,500 units a year. And we're looking at it more holistically. So there's still a 55% carve out for balance of state in our state housing tax credit program, where Dane County's been very successful in recent years. And now there has been a modest adjustment to push some more credits into rural in the 9% program, but we like to think Dane County's still way ahead of where it was 3 years ago. It's more of like an adjustment. And then within Dane County, in the areas of economic opportunity category, I know that oftentimes a lot of the schools score very well. A lot of the different census tract driven metrics, there are very good census tracts in Dane County that score well. I know that if you're in more of the urban core, there's a lot of proximity to amenities where Dane County's been scoring very, very well. And then I'm trying to think of another area, maybe financial leverage. Specifically, Dane County maintains a dedicated affordable housing fund where projects gain access to soft debt that other counties don't typically have, and that allows Dane County projects to do very well in the financial leverage category. And every year we'll do an analysis, and we're working on it right now, hoping to get it out in September, where it says, these are the categories that really separated projects from the pack. And year over year, the last couple of years, it's been financial leverage, areas of economic opportunity, and development team. I have been leading the charge in terms of who gets an award and who doesn't. And I guess the one that I didn't touch on is development team. We're trying to find ways to bring new developers in, which is a good thing. But within Dane County, we have a very robust development ecosystem with very experienced practitioners. And if we can continue to forge those relationships, I think Dane County has a bright future in the program, absolutely.
Matthew.
Does anybody want to ask any questions of Matt?
Matt, this is Brian Sheving. So has the initial couple of years of experience with the state credit, and I heard some of the changes, there's a lot of changes there, so I'm going to read them again later, but has the initial year or two or a couple of years of the new state credit made you think differently about, you know, how you award that, or, you know, what's the experience been?
So well, number one, nice to speak with you again, Brian. It's been a while.
Good to see you.
I'm just going to speak from a numbers perspective and then kind of anecdotally in general.
Okay.
The first 3 years of the program, Milwaukee and Madison, or Milwaukee and Greater Madison, have dominated the state housing tax credit program. The state housing tax credit program legislation itself was enacted with a formal preference for communities of 150 or fewer.
Right.
And there's been a lot of pressure to produce more rural housing type units through that program. So largely a lot of our macro level policy changes were in reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a formal precedent to push development to those smaller communities? And like I said, we're looking at it two different ways. It's not just rural, it's also a small urban assessment. But we wanted to be cognizant that the bigger municipalities are the areas that typically can charge more rent, and they are the areas that have more demand. Mm-hmm. So what we would see is a lot of 120, 140, 160 unit developments, very large developments that could actually be structured in this program that was a bit of an inferior subsidy. So we wanted to make sure that we still carved out a bunch of our credits for the balance of state projects. So it's definitely a balancing act, and it's something we're going to keep a real close watch on. And just keep in mind that we're in year one of a 2-year QAP.
Right.
So if we learn something, it's never our intention to introduce unintended consequences. So as we learn more about the program, I would not be surprised if we make moderate adjustments to set aside percentages, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, and for folks who are not, I mean, originally that program, and to Matt's reference, was designed to try to, there were some in the legislature that felt as though a lot of programs ended up benefiting Madison, Milwaukee, and the larger cities. And so the idea and I've talked to the author of that legislation several times, and somebody I know, was to do what Matt said, was to try to push them into other communities. But that's not always easily, it's not always easily done anywhere, but it's in rural communities where you don't either have the population or the investment base. It's a challenge. I mean, let's face it, it's a challenge. And we have different challenges, but some of the same here in Fitchburg too. So, okay, thanks for the information.
Can I just ask a simple question? How do you intend to disseminate this new policy to entities that might be interested in WIDA, getting a WIDA tax credit? I mean, in the past, you guys ran conferences, I know, but considering the current social environment, what's your plan to make sure that everybody knows what's happening here?
Sure, I think that that's a very appropriate question given these odd experiences we're having with the pandemic. And I might even touch base with Rebecca in this conversation. I know that it's a plan of WIDA's to start hosting a series of webinars to talk through tax credit changes we've made. And we've also modified our software and application system. So it's a two-pronged series of touch base we're going to do with the community. But I don't know, Rebecca, if you have any extra information you wanted to share, because typically that's been coming out of our community engagement partners. And you're spot on. How do we make sure everybody knows about it? I think it's a concerted marketing effort that's oftentimes led by commercial lending and our community engagement group in unison. But hopefully in early October, since we don't have a conference this year, we can do some dedicated webinars that are live, but then hopefully also posted to our website.
Yeah, and I would just add, that's a great point, Matt. On our website, there are WIDA email subscriptions that you can sign up for. So if you go to WIDA.com, there'll be a link up at the top that says WIDA email subscriptions. You can choose the reminders and notifications that you'd like to get, and one of them will let you know if there are different webinars and changes and things like that. But then also, my contact information as well. I can, kind of be your point of contact for any questions or things like that.
Let me suggest also that you should take a look at the banking industry and see if you can partner with them, because as a former banker, I was aware of the fact that many of our potential construction customers were conversant with what WIDA was doing. And so I don't know how you do it, but you should target them so that they begin to also become your people who are going to advocate for you among their existing customers.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to ask Matt any questions or share any observations about these changes, about the program itself? I think you're definitely going to be inspiring some new type of partnerships as you're emphasizing. The county has been very lucky in the last few years with all of the developments we've received, and we're very grateful for that. So the focus of statewide or more rural communities is certainly probably long overdue, and I'm really glad that you're doing that. There's a lot of room for innovation. So I'm also looking forward to hearing about your catalytic scoring or the innovative housing set aside. And I wonder, how are you receiving input on that category? Because that's a pretty significant new opportunity.
Sure, maybe this is a good opportunity for Nathan to chime in too. I know we're just kicking off at a high level some of the big policy type initiatives WIDA would like to incentivize, but again, I'd like to hear some of Nathan's thoughts on how we might engage with the community.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I mean, we just started having the high level, and so Matt can attest. I mean, even when we talk about this set aside, there's so many different things that we can do. We have to tame ourselves, right? I mean, you can't have just a smorgasbord of innovative ideas when you have a finite amount of resources. So I think we're trying to think through things that will be very impactful. And so we talked about some of those things, and as an organization, we talk about the harmonization between housing and economic development activities, and how to kind of better layer those. We talk about the need for supportive housing, but also various types of supportive housing and various vulnerable populations. So I think we're just at scratching the surface, but I do think we will begin to get some responses. We do not in our group in the commercial lending area, but the agency as a whole did a grant opportunity they're currently reviewing them now, but a number of ideas came out of that too. So that is going to be something that we look at as a base. But I do think probably in the next 2 months, or next month, really, probably a month and a half, we would start trying to solicit ideas from folks.
Thank you. We'll look for that. Mike Z.
Sure. Matt, could you provide some insight? Fitchburg is unique in that we're part of the 3 school districts with Madison, Verona, and Oregon. And we went through an exercise with the new QAP with a developer just kind of identifying where do we have land zoned appropriately. It seemed like they were focused primarily on the Oregon school district because they said that that's where they would max out whatever points are kind of allocated based on a school district kind of ranking there. Do you have any insight you could share on that? Why Oregon and maybe not why Verona? Why it kind of leans towards that direction?
Sure. So unfortunately, I don't have the appendice itself in front of me, but I can talk you through kind of the baseline methodology. So every year, the Department of Public Instruction performs like a school district report card. And annually, they update what the report card was for a district. And then based upon how high you score on the report card, we'll offer up either 5 points, 3 points, or no points. And it's really just, I'm trying to find it on the screen while I'm talking to you. If you're in the top 25% of the overall accountability score, you'll get 5 points. And if you're in the second quartile, you're eligible for 3 points. So in terms of who gets the points, that's something WIDA doesn't actually arbiter. We just interpret their data.
Thank you, Matt.
One other comment, Olivia, just for the committees of information is where we would like to get is we would kind of like to take the WIDA QAP scoring and kind of line that up with our zoning map to identify where are those kind of optimal affordable housing sites in Fitchburg that make the most sense and where there's also support with our committee and elected officials there. So that's something we want to kind of work towards, and we're going to hopefully engage the assistance of both our planning department and our public works department with the mapping and the GIS services, that in the future maybe we can kind of bring you a map that kind of overlays where those points would be accrued with our zoning map in the various census tracts in the school districts there. So that's something we want to work towards with our colleagues internally. So just a heads up for the Housing Advisory Committee.
That's great. That would be fantastic. Look forward to hearing about that or seeing that. One thing I was really surprised to hear, Matt, is the use of putting VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, into your compliance manual. How does that work? And yeah, thank you for that.
Sure. I wear the compliance monitoring hat sometimes, but I'm by no means an expert. It is something that's been mandated by the IRS that we incorporate, and I'm working with our compliance director to update our manual to make sure we have compliance. And it's something where it's a high-level initiative, and WIDA wants to be as transparent as to what our expectations for conformance with this very important topic are. And if you need more information, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll connect you with, her name is Tanya Buckner. She's our Director of Risk and Compliance, and she's an excellent resource.
Because this, specifically this, I mean, this issue has significant impact, I would assume, on the built environment. Just in, you know, from the planning perspective, how you build a street or how you light it or where you put your amenities, you know, and I would imagine that this would have some impact on the actual, you know, development itself as well. So I'm just curious about that.
Sure. From a development, design, and characteristic standpoint, WIDA largely defers to the local permitting board and land use departments at a local level to kind of do site plans to talk about, you know, is a double loaded corridor hallway construction the appropriate? Is it like we incentivize putting in unit washer and dryer so you don't have washers and dryers in the basement and a potentially on. So we touch on it a little bit, but largely we defer to the local permitting level.
Okay, thank you.
Just one quick question on the requirements here. Does WIDA require the fire safety sprinkler systems?
We are gonna require that you get permissive zoning, and largely the zoning process will require any fire requirement.
Thank you. Anybody else until, yeah, anybody else before we move on?
I looked at the PowerPoint and I noticed, you know, part of the sort of wheel with the budget in it involved community-based organizations. What organizations did folks have in mind locally that would be a part of this effort?
Is Rebecca on the line? I'd really be curious to know which graphic you were talking about. Is there any way you can bring it back up on the screen, Rebecca?
Yep, I'm still here. I apologize. I was having some connection issues, so I had to dial in with my cell, but let me see what I can bring up here. Yeah, I'm not sure what graphic. Do you recall? Sorry, I can't remember who asked the question. What graphic that was?
Was it during my portion or Rebecca's portion? Do you know?
This is Joe. This is what I got in the packet for the meeting. It's like a green PowerPoint workforce housing endowment program.
That's a separate document.
You're on to the next presentation.
Okay. I'm that forward thinking. Okay. Save it then.
That's a good segue.
Yeah. Do we have any other comments from any of the WIDA folks that are here before we move on? I don't want to.
Just thank you so much for your hospitality today. I really appreciate it.
It's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming and all the great work that you guys are doing at the state. It's you make really great partners, and we really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Excellent work as always.
Appreciate our.
Thanks, WIDA team.
Thank you, Rebecca, Matt. Great to see you all. Thank you so much. Now we have our next presentation. Thank you, Joe. An affordable housing pilot program, which is a very, very new thing and very interesting. And thanks for bringing this forward, Joyce and Mike Z. I'm dying to find out how you found these gentlemen and this idea. It's really a very compelling idea that we're going to be looking at.
Well, we're really excited to be able to work with these guys. Some of you that have been around a long time might remember Mike Harrigan as our longtime financial advisor with Ellers and Associates. And both he and Steve have retired from Ellers, but as you can see, they jump-started back in their entrepreneurs at heart and started their own company now focused on affordable housing. And we were going to have them do a presentation, and when we reached out to them, lo and behold, they're working on a pilot program, rent-to-own, kind of townhouse pilot program that we thought Fitchburg might be a natural for. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mike Harrigan's going to lead us off, and then I think he's going to transition over to Steve.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Mike. This is Mike Harrigan, and I do recognize a couple of alders there. I had a good opportunity to work for Julia and Dorothy, and Joe, I see, so it's nice to see some familiar faces again. For those that don't know me, just a little tiny bit of background before we get launched into our specific program. I had served before even joining my former company, which was Ellers. I was a city manager for 19 years in 3 communities in Wisconsin. And then in 1993, I got into public finance, joined the Ellers company, and ultimately became the chairman of the board of that company. And I had the pleasure of working with a president in that company for all the years that I was there, that chose also to retire last year. And so Steve Affelbacher is my partner now in this endeavor. And just to give you a little idea as to why I'm working on this and why this was important to me. When I was working at Ellers, one of the areas I did a lot of work with municipal bonds and have you, but also worked extensively in the tax income finance area of our practice. And as part of that, I did an awful lot of work with communities across the state in their economic development initiatives. And clearly, one of the biggest struggles that communities statewide were having was an attractive workforce. And a part of that problem was the lack of adequate housing in the segment, that would adequately be affordable for that type of a population. And so, knowing the tools financially that we had worked with, it just seemed that there could be a model that could be developed that might be a little more responsive. And because of the way that we thought about it, we wanted to create something that perhaps could be replicable, meaning that it wasn't a one and done deal, that the monies that the community, if there were monies that a community would invest, those dollars could come back and be reinvested again and again to make this program sustainable in a community. So what we've got here is something that's new, not brand new. It's not out of the world new in the sense that it has been something along these lines has been done. There's a couple of others that I can mention and will as part of the presentation, but fundamentally, what we're focusing on here as we get into the presentation, it's going to be discussion about a rent-to-own approach to housing. And we spent probably the first 9 months of our time just doing some vetting and research on this entire concept. And we spoke to a lot of people in this industry across the state of Wisconsin and in Minnesota to learn about some of the things that were going on. And on page 17 of our slideshow, there's a list of some of the people who were helpful to us along that process. But long story short, we found that really, I think what would mathematically work the best in most of the cases using this product, or using this concept as a product that would be either a townhouse style or a single family type of product, be it rehabilitation or new construction. And so that's been our focus to this point, not to say that's the only one. I think the great thing about this is that it's very tailorable to specific communities. And as we go through this, we can talk about how that will work. Steve is going to talk about the fundamentals of the program. I'll come back and talk about some specific thoughts that we have for Fitchburg, because we've spent a little time putting together a little model to demonstrate how this could work, just to give you a feel for it. We think that every community will require fine tuning because it really needs to be responsive to what the community's situation is, both insofar as the needs as well as what's practical and possible, both politically and financially for a given community. And so with that background, I don't want we want to be very respectful of the time that you have left today and try to get our presentation and give you a chance to ask a lot of questions. We're particularly excited about being able to do this for Fitchburg, not just because I've worked here before, but because I see that, as usual, Fitchburg has taken advantage of its ability to put together a panel that has a lot of expertise, drawing from its residents, people that have been in this business and industry and really know what's going on in general, and in housing in Dane County. And so I'm excited to have you review this, and we'd be very interested in having your thoughts and questions, because we can learn a lot from any of those questions that would come through to us on this from your knowledge. So we welcome that. Without further ado, I'm going to go to my slideshow, and I'll run the show in terms of the slides for Steve to get started, and then we'll just kind of tag team this thing. So without further ado, Steve, why don't you take us and start us through this?
Unmuted there. There I am. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. As Mike has indicated, my background includes being an elected official, a housing redevelopment authority director, and then ran Ellers for 35 years, and have a strong public finance business understanding. And Mike and I have taken his experiences and my experiences and have put together this idea. And so we're interested in your thoughts. We want to set this up so that it's, as Mike says, it's an endowment program, it's reoccurring, and it pays dividends down the road, but it addresses the question of affordable workforce housing. And I started work in Wisconsin in 1979 doing tax increment work, and have been working there ever since. And it's always been an issue as to how do you address this? And as we all know, it's important that people have homeownership opportunities available to them. And Mike, are you going to start the presentation there? And I can start to comment then on some of the thoughts that we had as we began to develop this, and help you understand what the concept is and how this is going to work. As we looked at that, there's really been this issue of affordable housing and what can communities do to help facilitate this. I think we heard from WIDA in terms of there's a program that's available that can help with affordable housing. This is another approach, and we've developed this so it's very flexible. We've developed it with a certain approach, but a lot of these assumptions can change and other sources can be used. An example of that is that we've looked at issuing CDA debt for the financing in the model that Mike is going to talk to you, but certainly working with local banks in the community is another way to finance this. So we're not really built into a particular approach. Our objective is to work with you and try to develop then what an approach that makes sense that fits your specific situation. So Mike?
I'm wondering, do we have the presentation up, whether it's who's
Mike, we're not seeing the presentation.
I haven't, I've got it on my screen. Is it on the,
Did you hit share screen, Mike?
Let's see.
The green share screens in Zoom?
Let me,
It's at the bottom of your screen. It's a little green button.
Let me get back to the Zoom meeting, hang on. Sorry about this, guys.
It's okay.
Okay.
I keep
By the way,
IT guy, so.
I'm the IT guy for our company, so bear with me just a little bit here. Are you seeing my screen yet?
Not yet. There, now it's coming.
There we go.
All right.
There, we got it.
Okay.
I think you've gotten copies of this too, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right, Mike, you want to go to the next slide, please? You know, as I mentioned, you know, we talked about the American dream being home ownership as being important. And what we've found is this affordability gap. And I don't need to go into detail with that. Mike, you want to hit the next slide? You know, communities are concerned about this. And as we've seen, labor, materials, land, the cost of accessing land, sewer and water have gone up. And you've reached the point where, in a lot of cases, the employer is paying competitive wages, but when you look at what they have for income to spend towards housing, and we've used 30 to 35%, the model that Mike is going to talk about, we use 30%. If you look at what's available for home ownership and paying 30% of their income for that, it's really results in renting. And there's two problems there. There's the down payment, the cash of having that, and having sufficient income to be able to handle it on an ongoing basis. And so that gap exists. We've been sensitive to this, and we've developed this idea to try to address that affordability gap and do it in a manner then that creates this endowment program. So Mike, would you turn the page then, or turn the slide, please? So let me just kind of give you a big overview as to what's involved in the program, and we're going to go into more detail then as we go through the presentation. But you know, this is a rent-to-own program. In other words, someone would start out renting with the idea then that they would be buying the home within a 4 to 8 year period, depending upon how the numbers would work. And this is a way then that we hope will address the gap. As a part of this then, they have to bring a little bit of equity to the table. We've developed that equity primarily over appreciation of the property, over their income increasing. And we've also seen then that, we've assumed then a payment in lieu of taxes to be able to address then getting to a point where their income will support what the costs are for a particular unit. And so the actors that are involved then would be the municipality. We would envision then that there be an overall program that would be developed. That program would include then the municipality looking at their situation and determining what are target incomes. What type of program would it be? Would it be single family? Would it be attached? Would it be townhouse type driven? Would it be new construction, or would it be rehabilitation? All of those are questions that the city or the village would address then as a part of establishing the program. And we would memorialize this in some sort of in a plan that would be prepared. It would also then have to have equity sources to be able to provide then the initial equity for the project, and may or may not support the tenant rent as we go through that. And as you go later on, we'll talk about a housing study. A lot of these questions, and all of these questions would be addressed as a part of that, which would be a next step should you decide to proceed. The other important actor in this would be the Community Development Authority, or the CDA, and they would be the group that would execute the program. They would own the facility. They would have to acquire it. They would be involved in the construction and the rehabbing, depending upon the direction provided by the municipality. They would also screen the tenants and make sure that the units are properly managed until they're sold. And so those are two major roles in that the CDA would perform until this is sold then to the individual tenant. The renter would be screened, and we would want to make sure that we were selecting the right type of renter that had an aptitude for home ownership, and that in 4 to 8 years, there'd be expected that there'd be enough equity that they could finance in the commercial market the purchase of that facility from the CDA, and repay then the municipality all of its front end costs, and potentially with some additional dollars that would be paid back into the endowment fund that would be created. So all of those upfront costs would be recouped as the numbers would be set up. And other important elements in this would be a management company that would be likely involved in managing this. The CDA could certainly do that, but we would guess that a management company would probably be retained by the CDA, but it doesn't have to be. A local builder, and then major sponsors, which could be major industries or other public entities that have an interest in this type of a program. With that then, we took a minute to look at what your housing study in 2019 indicated that was done by Cedar Corp. And what we found is that there's a need for affordable housing. The average price in 2017 was $325,000, which means a lot of these individuals that are in workforce housing can't afford those types of units. And in fact, only 5% of the ownership units can be afforded within the city or within Fitchburg. So the goal that's been identified in your housing study has been to target household incomes of 30% of new ownership units with a price between $174,000 to $217,000. Now, the model that we've developed, land and construction costs for the number that we used was just under $195,000. So it's midway between the range that you've identified in your housing study as a way to kind of give you a feel, can this work and how can it work? Your goals were also to build more attached and owner-occupied units, which is the concept that we've developed the numbers for has been a townhome kind of environment where the units are attached to one another. We think that makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of longer home ownership and provides amenities that a lot of people would want to have, which would be 2-car garages and backyards that would be important for someone to stay within the units then that they would be potentially purchasing within that 4 to 8 year period. We also understand that within tax increment districts 4 and 6, there's an opportunity, not next year, but the year after and in 2023, that TIF monies would be available to help with the equity portion of this program. So those are the assumptions that we used in modeling the program so that we understood that it fits what you've identified as important attributes of affordable housing within the community. So Mike, let me turn it over to you.
So in regard to getting into the needs for Fitchburg specifically, we believe that as a threshold undertaking, where we were to become involved, or anybody were to undertake this type of an initiative, it would really be necessary to do so under the direction of the city's governing body and its CDA and its properly designated housing advisors. So we think that a proper plan for a community is going to be tailored to that community and its specific needs. To Joe Maldonado's point earlier, who are these community partners? Who would be involved in this? That's going to be dictated and spelled out specifically by you guys, not us, in the community. It's going to be necessary to learn who the proper partners would need to be as part of an upfront feasibility analysis that should be done. As I said before, one of the real important things to us about this concept is that if it's properly structured, it's going to be sustainable into the future, and it would effectively create a revolving pot of money that could then be recycled again and again as these renters become homeowners. They're going to be, based on our model, mathematically, they're going to be able to repay the upfront equity that was advanced by the community, and that money will be available for other projects on an ongoing basis. It provides a path to home ownership for those that want to be homeowners, and something that we learned in the conversations that we had with the experts in this industry are that not everybody wants to be a homeowner. There's a lot of people that like renting and prefer renting for a variety of reasons. And so It's important, as Steve mentioned, the screening process. It's important to have people that are motivated for home ownership become part of the plan. We also, having served as long as we have in working with local government, one thing we know is that most municipalities are very risk averse, and this program is designed to be sustaining so that in such a way that it will not impact property taxpayers if the, assuming the program is implemented correctly. One of the things that we think is important is that anybody coming into the program really ought to have some upfront investment here. And so in our model, individuals, we've tailored this to specifically serve, it can serve different slices of need here. And part of the conversation that needs to be had with the local municipalities is to learn what segment of need you're most interested in serving with this program. But in our example, we've targeted the 80 to 120% of median income for your area. It could go down as low as 60, but we know that a lot of the tax credit programs that you just heard about that WIDA is involved in really are designed to serve that particular segment. And in this case, we're looking at the 80% of median income. Those tenants would need to bring a $5,000 equity contribution to the table. And the CDA, or conceivably in some communities, an employer or a foundation could provide the balance of the equity. But ultimately, the amount of equity that would be required would be an amount sufficient to assure mathematically that the tenant wouldn't have to dedicate more than 30% of his or her income to the actual cost of housing, including some of the other costs that were involved, utilities as well as fees.
Michael, I have a clarifying question. With that 80%, are you saying 80 or below, or are you saying between a certain range?
What we're saying is 80 to 120.
Got it.
We've also modeled it with 60 and above. So it's 80 and above or 60 and above. But we, in the example that you will see in a minute, that assumed an 80% number. So, we can show you the other numbers as well. So as I say, the source of CDA equity could come from a variety of potential areas, but the one area that is available that is very accessible to Fitchburg that you've already identified is the one-year extension of your tax increment districts. That enables any community that extends the district for a year capture that 1 year of additional revenue. That 1 year's additional revenue, 75% of that could be up to 100, but at least 75% of it under state law must be dedicated for affordable housing anywhere within the city. It doesn't have to be within that tax increment district. In some cases, existing tax increment districts that have surplus revenues with a properly designed project plan can also be utilized. Those funds could be used. As I say, in some communities, employers have made dedicated dollars available for this, or municipal cash contributions have been made in some cases.
So let me take a minute just to talk through the next couple slides. And Joe, I don't know if this was the slide that you had your question on previously, but what we were trying to do is just give you kind of a big picture sources and uses for the program. In other words, where would the sources come from to pay the debt? You'll see then, and that's on the left-hand side. The red area then would be the debt that would be issued that would carry the project. That would be dependent on then the other equity sources. As Mike says, is said in the presentation, well, this would be designed such that the rents from the tenants, in the model that we have, the tenants are paying 80% of median income, area median income. 80% of that would pay for the debt service that would be outstanding on this particular project. You'll see then the other equity pieces could come then from a community partner, TIF extension, TIF surpluses, and we arbitrarily pick $5,000 from a tenant as their cash contribution. That's really dependent upon how you would like to handle the project. It could be more, be less, but it was a value judgment we made to say that we think it's important that somebody that comes into this opportunity have some sort of, in a sense, skin or equity into the project. And we thought that 5 would be a reasonable amount that most people should be able to come up with as a part of the individual project. But that can change then depending upon what your desires are. The uses of funds, as we've designed this, all of the costs to set up the program, all the costs for the construction or reconstruction of the program, and the management costs of this have been included into the overall numbers. If we were to proceed, there would be the housing study to kind of determine the parameters of the program. If the program were to move ahead, there would then be the endowment fund created, work with the municipality in regards to what does the housing program look like and how are the funds to be spent. And then those funds, once they're sold, would come back to the municipality. You'll see then, based on all of those costs in our example, about 62% is for construction, 1% for the housing study. Reserve fund would be money set aside in the event somebody doesn't pay their rent. We've got something to go to handle that at 3%. Fees overall, this would be not just housing, Mike and I, in terms of this, but what we've estimated to be other attorneys that would be involved, bond counsel potentially, other attorneys helping draft some of the documents that would be involved in this. And then you'll see the other piece of that then is the site acquisition that's a part of that. So we wanted to give you a feel as to what that is. Those percentages can change depending on the facts and circumstances. We had a discussion last month with a community, and they're going to give the site for the project that they're talking about. So that site acquisition cost would be 0. That would allow more for construction. So all of those decisions need to be discussed and looked at to see if we can make sure that this works from a cash flow standpoint. Mike? The other fundamentals of the program then would be that the CDA would secure the financing for either new or rehab, and it owns the project. So that's an important element here. We built into this the contraction for management fees, and then that would include then, well, what does a management company do? And we'd at least envision the education piece, the screening piece, the collecting of the rents, and the managing of the units, as would be needed. The monthly rents then, as we pointed out, are sufficient to pay the financing costs. And we've designed then a pilot or payment in lieu of taxes, which would be then the tax rate for Fitchburg that would be paid by these tenants. The other piece then, this would be set up as a pilot payment, under state law. The CDA is contracted to make any sort of a property tax payment, but we'd envision establishing a pilot payment, which would be equal to what the proportionate share of the taxes would be then within the city or within Fitchburg to be paid back then to to them as a part of this particular project. And then at the point of resale, our goal is to have the original equity from the CDA, any appreciation, which could then account for some of the interest that's there, is paid back to the endowment program to be used then on a future project. And the goal would be to set this up and keep rolling that on projects as you go into the future. The balance of that equity is kept by the tenant and is used for their equity, so that in the example that we're going to be talking about, we assumed a commercial takeout of 20% equity for the project. If equity could be less because of other types of programs, that would be a plus in regards to selling the tenant or potentially making the unit available for the tenant to purchase at an earlier price or earlier period of time than what we've anticipated. So to give you a feel in terms of the timeline, just overall, the feasibility and the execution, we've estimated that to be in that 1 to 2 year period. That includes then the housing study, the acquisition of the land, the screening of tenants. You'll see then the rent period, and that would be then the rehab and construction of the building. You'll see in rents 2 to 8, depending upon the numbers, and it could be anywhere from 2 to 8, but the tenant pays the monthly payments. The equity grows within the individual project till we reach a point then where instead of renting, we're going to have the tenant own the project, where the tenant then pays market value for the unit that they're in, repays the CDA, and in turn then refinances and provides that equity back then to the CDA. So that's kind of the stage that we see, and the timing then is specific to the program and what we can create as far as incentives within the individual program. Mike is going to talk about a model that we've developed using some of the numbers that we've come up with, and I think we wanted to give you an idea as what the numbers would look like and how this would play out for a 10-unit townhouse project. So Mike, let me turn it over to you.
This, as Steve said, is a model. It's one of any number of scenarios that could be modeled, but this assumed a 10-unit, the construction of a 10-unit townhouse type of product with garage. As I said before, the income level would be 80% of the median family income for the county or above. That number happened to be for most recent published statistic was 75,360. 30% of that number is what would be available for housing. So that's $22,608 a year. We're estimating the cost of the units themselves per unit to be $226,800. The net actual construction is about 190 and change. We talked about $5,000 of equity being brought to the table by the tenant. And then the balance of equity that would be needed in order to net out a mortgage that would allow for payment of the income at a level of 30% after we've deducted the costs for utilities, management fees, condominium fees, and tax payment in lieu of taxes is the $204,800 number for the mortgage, and we're assuming a mortgage rate to be charged at 2.9%. What we're assuming, and so that's at the front end. What we're assuming is that, and what we've modeled, and we've shared, we certainly can share this with the committee. We've given some of these numbers to Mike and Joyce in our spreadsheet format, but for purposes of today, these are summarized numbers from our spreadsheets. We assume the following: it will take 4 years based on the mathematics of the assumptions that are going into this, with a rate of appreciation of 1% per year in terms of the appreciation of the property value. We're assuming a takeout mortgage being available at 4% in year 4 for the tenant to buy out the interest of the property. We're assuming some growth in wages and inflation wages at 2%. And the value of that unit after the 4-year period in the 5th year would be $238,369. At that point, we would be looking to refinance it conventionally. And as part of that process, we would expect that the CDA would get repaid its original equity investment in the project of $17,000. There would be $183,000 left on the mortgage that would have to be satisfied. There would be an additional 37, based on the growth and value of the property, less the amount paid to the CDA and the amount owed on the loan. That leaves a residual equity of $37,572. And the net difference between the mortgage payment and the 30% allocation, as you'll see in a moment, is about just shy of about $300 a month. That results in an accumulated surplus of an additional $20,000. Excuse me, the net amount of the equity required to refinance at 20% would be 20% of this number of 238,000 would be $47,000. So subtracting that from the residual equity and the accumulated surplus, there would be a $10,277 additional rebate available to the CDA at that point in time as well. So the CDA, just to summarize what occurs starting with year one, the tenant income is $6,280. And then after this is per month. After the sale, it's in year four, that income is risen to $6,798. 30% of that number is $1,084 or $2,039 in year four. The condo fees, the pilot, the management fee, and utilities, and the insurance takes $669 off the $1,084, leaving $1,215 available for the mortgage and debt payment. The actual payment, based on 2.9% of the amount that we borrowed, is $860 a month, and that leaves $356 available for surplus, available for unknowns, and reduction of the equity required at takeout. In the year four picture, these are the same numbers, and we still end up with a surplus for the tenant at that point going forward of about $255. Just to summarize, what are the benefits to the city or the community, if it's a smaller community? What are the benefits here overall to you? You end up with a project that would have a value of approximately $2.4 million at the end of the day. Oops, the back one. We're going to be repaying the original equity advanced by the CDA of $170,000 or $17,000 per unit. That's $170,000. This number on the handout that you got before the meeting, I had wrong. That was the number you had in your presentation was for a single unit, but that number for all 10 units would add up to $102,777. The homeowner ends up with a home that's valued at $238,000 in year 5. They have equity that's grown to $47,000, and they still have only 30% of their income that they're going to be dedicating to the cost of housing. And so this is a model that obviously depends on a number of assumptions going into it. We've tried to utilize numbers that we think are realistic based on what's available immediately in today's market. And this would have to be tailored, as I said before, going forward for folks as we see some of these circumstances change. But in any event, for the overall project, the dollars coming in would be $50,000 from the various tenants, from the 10 tenants that would be occupying the dwelling. we need 170,000 in cash from the CDA. And then there would have to be debt, and it wouldn't have to be CDA debt, it could be bank debt. But there is the ability to issue the Community Development Authority obligations. And we know, based on our work with the city in the past, that you have some limitations on your debt horizon, so we are sensitive to that as well. Again, this is modeled for 80%. The numbers can be modeled for 60% or lower. And it could also be modeled for a single family instead of the 10-unit project that we did model for as well. But these are all things that we do with direction from the community as we go. Steve?
Yeah, so last slide, and happy to answer questions, is, as we viewed this, the keys to support our, partners. We've talked about who they are, and developing a plan for the housing analysis that really reflects your community desires, the market, and facts and circumstances, and finding reputable developers and management companies are going to be key in making sure that this is a long-term investment that's going to pay dividends and achieve what we've desired to achieve here. And last then is the careful screening and education for tenant programs, because you want to have somebody that has an aptitude for ownership instead of thinking that the landlord's going to come in and change the leaky toilet or whatever it is, that they need to have some sense of ownership and desire to make sure that they can take care of this. And I think that screening process is going to be important. So as Mike has indicated, we've looked at your situation. We think we've developed and modified this concept to reflect and try to test whether or not it works. And at least on the assumptions that we've prepared, we believe it works. We're happy to answer questions as to whether or not you think our assumptions are reasonable. We really would like to have that feedback. At some point after looking at this and thinking about it, if you said, oh, this makes some sense, we would view then moving ahead and doing a feasibility study to help address the question of, is it 80%, is it 85% of income, getting a better number on what those construction costs are and all of the assumptions that are a part of this. So with that, Mike, any final comments before questions?
We just to give you an idea, these are folks that we've had, good conversations with in preparing for this program. We actually did engage the Von Briesen firm to do the vetting legally for the program. So we've done the diligence and have gone through that work and have a high level of comfort that legally it's able to be executed in Wisconsin as we're in the manner that we're talking about doing it. And then the other folks here are all individuals that we've encountered and have had an opportunity to at least pick their brains, and we've gotten a lot of help from a lot of people. This isn't to suggest that all these folks are endorsing our program. I don't mean to mislead anybody by saying these are testimonials from any of these folks. It's just people that we've gotten a lot of help from, to give you an idea that we've spent the time to do our diligence on this program as we've developed it. So with that, I think we'll just stop and see if we can answer any questions for folks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. That was great, very interesting. Never seen a proposal like that before. So yeah, you guys have done a lot of work on that. One question I have right off the top is, I don't know if you've actually looked at actual sites in Fitchburg, or if there's, because land is extremely expensive. And so your model assumes that this can be built with the costs that you have laid out.
Yeah, the short answer is no. We have not taken a look at a specific site in Fitchburg as yet. We're certainly well aware of the market in Fitchburg. and recognize the challenges that presents insofar as cost. And so the availability of a specific site is going to be something that we would expect to really have to work closely with the staff, probably as a starting point, to begin to get a handle on whether or what areas might lend themselves to it. And also whether or not, as part of any cost associated with the acquisition of that site, we would be able to underwrite any of that with some of the dollars that might be available from the districts that we've been talking about as well.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of questions, but I'd like to turn it over. Julia?
Thank you, Mike and Steve. I think that I really love this presentation. This is what, you know, we need to have this time of tools for our housing. And, you know, I am very supportive of that. We need to keep 1 year of our tax incremental listing open and invest the money in a housing fund. So my question to you is on slide 15. You know, when you mentioned about the CDA debt, that money could be also the money, it could be some of the money left in the tax incremental list in that housing fund, because it would suppose that by 2023, we are gonna have about $6 million sitting in that fund, okay? So how we can utilize that money, those millions of dollars, and what the city of Fitchburg can do. We can buy the land, you know, because the land in the city is very expensive, you know, so, or we can be, you know, being the revolving loan for these folks so they can, you know, eventually own those housing, you know what I mean? So how do you envision using that amount of money? You know what I mean? Is because in my mind, I always thought that maybe we can use the money to purchase the land, you know, and then we work with a developer and I say, here we have the land, how we can make those units more affordable, you know what I mean? So, but I don't know, Mike, can you,
well,
you know, I want to understand, can we use that, how we can use that money?
The answer to your question, Julia, is that it doesn't have to be debt. If the city has capital, or if we have capital available from any other source, obviously it gives you a much more flexibility if you've got the cash to do that without having to borrow the money, and you can really even do more to tailor who you can afford to help if you can design your own interest rate around that. So yes, I think Fitchburg is probably in a position that probably, frankly, most communities would not be in, given the dollars that you identified that could be potentially available from your retiring tax income district. So congratulations for running a good program on your tax income side to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I could just add, you know, I would certainly agree that would be an option to look at, and we could look at that in the housing study. You know, it also will reduce risk because, you know, you're really self-financed, and if anything happens, you don't have the risk of having debt out there that potentially, if a pandemic occurs, right, and no one's paying their rent, you know, how do you handle that? So that's a trade-off. On the other hand, by using it all as cash, you're going to minimize, or you're going to reduce the number of programs that you can do. So you're not going to be doing as many programs as you potentially would by borrowing the funds and then using the rents to support the project. So I think those are all public questions that certainly can be looked at as part of an analysis.
Marshall, did you have a comment or?
I have a couple of questions. First, I want to say this is an exciting program. As a
past developer to actually afford to purchase homes as a home purchase program. Tax credits don't work very well for that. So I'm delighted to see this. So I have a few questions about the model and assumptions with it. And tying into Julia's question about purchasing the land, would you be having covenants run with the land for these 10 units or individual units so that when these residents purchase them, and at some point life may take them and they may want to sell it and move on after they own this house, that it remains part of an affordable program, or is it then going to fall into the market rate economy and continue to escalate that way? So that's a question that I have. And then ownership structure of, I'll wait.
Well, let me just take a stab at that one quickly, because that has come up as something that some communities would have an interest in having considered. I really think that is a possible option available to you, but I think you can appreciate that comes with a trade-off in terms of the attractiveness of that, both to the potential buyer as well as from your perspective, in the sense that it has the potential to limit the value of that property going forward, because that would have to be considered. That would have to be taken into account as a part of the subsequent value and proposition and structure of that by an appraiser or an assessor going forward. So
that's true.
I think that that's part of the design process for you to consider as part of that analysis. And I think what we would want to be able to do to give some comfort to the decision makers in this kind of a situation is to work with your assessor in modeling the assumed impact on value going forward, so that we can see how that plays out in relationship to the math of the deal itself and the assumptions of it. So I think everybody can go into it with their eyes open to the extent possible.
Yeah, I agree. I just know from seeing out in Washington State some planned communities that had affordability requirements for home purchases, and those units didn't have any covenant running with it, and the whole development became unaffordable for workforce housing. So it is, I think, something that should be considered if this is a goal to meet workforce housing, that I think we will have a need for workforce housing as we move forward in time as well. And so land is always limited. So even though Fitchburg has a lot. The other question I had was, I'm assuming on the assumption you find 10 residents that are going to move into this 10-unit property all at one time, and they're all going to basically end up purchasing the units at the same time. And then would this 10-unit building, which would have some shared expenses, be condominiumized? Would this be how you would have the overall ownership structure in the future going forward?
I think that's the concept, yes. That's the approach we thought about at this point in time.
Yeah, the individuals would own their units, but there would be an association then that would share common fees, and they'd be part of it.
Right, and you would incorporate the residents in their homeowners association from day one, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, I'm done. Thank you.
This is Godwin. I had a question. Madam Chair? My question, though, first of all, I think I found your presentation very intriguing and very creative. The major issue that I have is in understanding what we're trying to do. When you talk about affordable housing and indicate that the median family income that we're looking at to acquire these homes in the $75,000 salary level, I find that very, very troubling. And the reason I do that is that I'm not sure that we are taking into consideration what the median income in the Fitchburg area, in fact, the whole Madison-Fitchburg area. My understanding, and this is something you may also want to check, is that any school teacher in our area doesn't make enough money really to be able to afford a home. 75,000 to me is far beyond what many of these working people earn. So I thought that, in my opinion, really discards any things that we've put together. I mean, unless we are able to zero in on what the average working person earns in our area, this is still, in my opinion, something that's not affordable. So maybe I should start out here. Mike, do you know, for example, what the median income in the Fitchburg area is? You have an idea?
Working off the Dane County median
The
income.
Dane County
what is
area median income for a family of four, Dane County, is 78,500. I just looked on the HUD website.
Really?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, do you know what the median income is for teachers and firemen, for example, people who are on the front lines? You have an idea what they are? Because those are the people I like to see earn and stay in our community and continue to thrive. Go ahead, Julia.
You're assuming that maybe you have two person working in a, you have like, two person working in a family. So,
Well, that's an
so you can,
assumption too.
you can achieve that median income, but you have only one, it's a different story.
That's true.
Mike? Harrigan?
The couple of things that I just want to mention.
Sure.
First of all, yes, we chose the $75,000 figure based upon published information, best information we were able to get from, I think it was WIDA and a HUD. We got our data for this was a three and a half people. But regardless of that, this is a matter, I mean, it's a problem based upon what the needs of the community are, but it's also a math problem. And you can select as a community what the target is. Let's take your teacher example. If the teachers and that you're trying to serve, or the population, whatever their employment is, that you're trying to serve, is a population whose income is for a 3-person household or a 4-person household is only $60,000, or pick your number. That number can be used in this type of a project, but it's just going to reduce the number of units that you can create and serve, because that means it's going to increase the subsidy needed from the Community Development Authority in order to bring the mortgage down to a number that's affordable for that income group. So we're not going to be able to, the cost of construction aren't going to be changed. Those are the costs of construction. We have to work within the parameters of that. Whatever the interest rate is, if you've got cash instead of having to borrow the money that can help. But ultimately, this is why it's necessary to do the more detailed feasibility assessment so that we get, whoever would do this would get the assessment from the community as to what that population segment is that you truly want to serve. We picked this as an example for you based upon what the published information is for the county. And if there's something more targeted that you would prefer to see, that's possible. I mean, it's possible to model that and we can see what happens.
And Mike, just to add that that's really part of the housing analysis that we do, the feasibility study, is to really hear from you as to what elements you want reflected in the study, and that further detail will allow us to come back and say, you know, if you, I'm just picking an income, $50,000, if that's the number, we can show you what that means in terms of units and how many people can benefit for the program versus a number at 80% of income. So it's really tailored to your situation once you understand the impacts then of what those decisions are.
One question I have is would a family or an individual be able to access first-time homebuyer funds if they don't own the house and the CDA owns the condo? Or
we think so, but we didn't want to plan on that in the analysis. We wanted to be conservative in our assumptions, and so we just chose that conventional financing. But there are various programs out there that may require 4% equity or something that's less than 20%, and they certainly would help this situation, but we didn't want to count on that.
And then one question I just have, and we might have to wrap it up, but so when there's this problem, this issue of the CDA owning it, and then the family or whoever's living in it, and then there's some sort of a problem, and something needs to be fixed or something. Yeah. So how? I mean, I'm sure it's all spelled out, but it makes me a little nervous to think about who's going to be liable for what under what circumstances. Because the home ownership, they're actually renters and they're not homeowners.
And adding a real quick to Olivia's point, if the renter just flakes out, period, and walks away, what position is the city left in?
You put your finger on probably the key risk factor that needs to be managed. This is one reason that we built a reserve fund into the structure of the deal, so that in the event that there is a problem with the continuity of rental payments or other hiccup in that direction, we would have the ability to address that. But I think the other facet of this that's important as part of the program design is providing for not just a one and done list of individuals that are interested in participation of a single project at a single point in time, but having that list and maintaining it so that individuals would be offered an opportunity to be fitted into the project in the event that there was a problem with one of the tenants that was unable to meet their obligations through to the point of takeout on the sale.
Mike, and I'd add that they would also lose their equity, the $5,000 in this, as well as any appreciated equity that would be generated then from the time that they executed the contract to when they left. And, we would envision, as Mike indicated, having a list and someone stepping into that role then in terms of assuming then the future renting of that space. The other question in terms of something going wrong, that's why we believe it's likely that we're going to need a management company that would address the day-to-day issues, that need to get done. So it's not the CDA itself that has to go over and fix the leaky water pipe. There's the management company, and they've made arrangements for those sorts of events, as well as the other list of services that we've talked about.
Right. And ultimately, I mean, the CDA is the developer, and they will hold the risk. Dorothy, did you have a question? I think we have to wrap it up after this.
Yeah, I wanted to find out what staff involvement we would have. This sounds like it's big enough that we would want an extra body that would manage this and manage the management company and everything else. It sounds like a full-time job for someone in the city.
We think that paying, I mean, we've built into this a fee for the management company, and there would be a contract with the management company and the CDA that we would hope would address all of these situations. And if there were issues with the CDA, or excuse me, the performance of the management company, that would be something that the CDA would address. But we've not contemplated a specific staff person, and we'd certainly be willing, in the study to look at that. But I think given the number that we put in for management fees and what we'd envision as the management contract, that should address, I think, the concerns.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this program, and I really appreciate you bringing this forward, and I think this will definitely have some further discussion. Uday, do you want to just close with the last comment or question?
Yeah, so I want to know what is going to be next with this project, and I know that there is a lot of questions that were very granular, but I think we need to look this like at the big picture first, and then we go through the detail. So I would like to know what is going to be the next step, because we have this great presentation, and what is going to be next? We continue working on this. What is going to be? It's something that we need to have this presentation in the council. So the council, I would like to have this presentation at council level, invite Mike and Steve and one of the committee of the whole, to do this presentation.
Julio,
But I don't know.
Julio, we can coordinate that with you and Mike and Steve. And one other thing for the committee's information is we actually put in a line item request in our housing fund budget for 2021. We still have some money left over from the small tax increment district that we used to capitalize and pay for the original housing plan. So we put a line item in there specifically for, in one of their last slides here, it talks about the Workforce Housing Endowment Program feasibility study. So we've got a line item in the proposed 2021 budget specifically for that body of work to be done.
Okay.
So I think what we would be looking for from this group, and if we go forward at the committee of the whole, kind of a vote of support or motion of support to proceed to that next step at some point in time when it's appropriate. And I'll defer to the council people on that direction.
Okay. I would say that we need to move forward with this.
Do you actually want to take a vote on this? Do we want to take a vote on moving forward and supporting the housing study that Mike just outlined?
You're talking to me?
Yeah, I'm asking the whole committee. I think this is a discussion, or do we want to wait until the committee of the whole has seen the presentation, or do you want to support this now? Because we've already seen it.
Was it posted as a decision item or just
It was not. It was not. It was not.
I think we should do it.
Then we probably should not vote.
Yeah, I would think that we would want to wait until CETA gets a look at it, because they have such a, I mean, I'm intrigued by the proposal. And when I was at WIDA, we looked at similar models, or I shouldn't say similar, but some models on rental and condo and things like that. So I'm intrigued by the model, but I also, to Dorothy's point, it wasn't listed as a decision item. And secondly, CETA has such a big role on this thing. And I think there's good discussion to be had there.
Yep, that's true. I agree.
Julia?
So the next step should be, we need to have a presentation about this in CEDA, and then we had to have like sort of a vote in CEDA, in the next CEDA meeting.
Well, and
what do you think, Mike?
Yeah, and Julie, we actually remember invited C to sit in on this
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, but we don't
today.
have too many people.
Right, yep.
We're missing half of the team,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have this presentation in CEDA, and we need to have it should be an action item in the next CEDA agenda. And then, you know what I mean?
Okay, we can coordinate with Mike and Steve. I'm not sure what their availability is.
Okay.
We've got a CEDA meeting next week, Thursday, on the 24th, guys. If you're available, I'll circle back with you tomorrow.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for all your work.
Thanks, Mike and Steve.
Appreciate it.
The next item is number 7, report from department, the memo that we sent out, Joyce sent out to us regarding some of the other questions and activities we had of the mayor and the administrator.
And I think Joyce had communicated with Dorothy. Dorothy, were you going to report out on this? As the council?
All I was really going to be able to say is that it was brought up in council, but council never really did anything other than talk about it a little bit, I don't think. Julia might remember more than I do.
No, I think that council, at the end of the meeting, Mike did a summary, and we decided that we want to continue the discussion about the ADU, and then the mayor wants to see more proposal with home ownership, and this is what the pilot is gonna be great. What else, Mike? And the other one was there? We didn't discuss the review of the park and fees, because that one is kind of like another, it's more complex, and the budget is coming now in October, and we decided that one it should be another conversation for a whole meeting. But we decided that we should go ahead with the ADU and the mayor's position was to bring more proposals with home ownership. That's it, Mike? This is what it was?
Yeah, I think we were going to reach out to our colleagues in the planning department with the direction that the council provided that they would like to take a look at accessory dwelling units. And so I think maybe at our next quarterly meeting, we'd like to try and coordinate, depending on the planning staff's availability with their workload and everything, to see if they could come and kind of talk about that specifically and kind of provide background and information that right now it is allowed in smart code. And then I think there are some unique specific situations in Euclidean where you can do them, but it's not very widespread. So I think we want to have more of an information and education session with the planning staff on that concept in general there. And then on the developer proposal or council involvement with development proposals, we've reached back out to Ruth Rolick, I think, at the City of Madison to get more details on exactly what is their process. The council, it seemed like, was inclined to want to be more engaged in the development proposals that would come forward in their district, but they would like us to kind of put together a little bit more of a process. We do it informally right now through our Fitchburg Development Guide, where we always encourage any developer, whether it's residential or whether it's commercial, to go and to contact the alders of that respective district. So the question becomes, maybe as we bring forward a proposal, should it be a requirement rather than just a suggestion there? And so we want to do a little bit more homework on that and bring it to this group and also to CETA to kind of have that conversation to say, how do we kind of include that in our Fitchburg Development Guide that we already have that takes you through the various processes, everything from conditional use permits to rezonings and land divisions and things like that. So we'll be back to you with that stuff. As Julia pointed out with the park fees there, the council decided that that's probably another whole committee of the whole meeting and discussion where they could really vet that more and discuss that more in depth and in more detail there. So I think, Julia, we're gonna maybe look to you to have us back to the committee of the whole in the queue and the schedule, you know, to have that discussion, because I think from this group's perspective, you still would like to see us at least have that conversation related to park fees and our overall development fees there. We did send out because Julia brought up a good point, I think it was at the committee of the whole meeting that night. We did share all of our fee schedules with the council after that committee of the whole meeting, because sometimes people don't realize that as part of our budget process annually, the fee schedule is adopted as part of that budget process there. So we included all of those fees from planning, public works, building inspection, so that way the council members are all aware of what are the existing fees at this point in time and what's proposed for 2021. And that includes the park fees and the land dedication and things like that.
Did you give them also the fees of some of our competitive communities so that they make a better decision?
They have what was in the housing study there that did the comparison there, that analysis that was done, yes.
Well, and this, I'm sorry, this is Brian. I would say too that that's a discussion that CETA needs to have too, and help provide some direct input to the council on those issues, because I'm intrigued in what's laid out here, but there are some foundational issues there to me, there's 10 and 11-year-old foundational issues with the original comp plan, and you've heard me say that before, that's kind of helped cause this problem. But then some of these other things, and I mean, they're all things we can get at, but I just want to make sure that CETA is thinking about those too.
Any other questions on the memo there? Otherwise, I got one other update for you just on the housing front. We found out that the two 16-unit buildings on the south side of Greenway Cross, they're north of the Maple Lawn Apartments that we had lent our name some years ago for those to be completely renovated with WIDA tax credits, and that was a complete renovation that Royal Capital did. So the two 16-unit buildings just north of that are up for sale. And that, again, is some of that older, affordable housing that hasn't been upgraded or renovated for a long time. The units on the north side of Greenway Cross, they actually went up for auction probably 4 years ago, and they did get a complete renovation there, including not just carpet and paint, but new kitchen cabinets, appliances, new bathrooms, and they even went as far as what one of the WIDA gentlemen commented on, that they took the washer and dryer units out of the basements there and put the stackable units within the units there. So we're hoping that we've kind of put the word out to some particular developers that those units are available, but hopefully we can find a good partner to see, so we get another set of that older housing stock renovated and upgraded. I talked to one developer about it and said, is there a possibility that you could acquire it and completely demolish it and bring us new housing? But he said, Mike, he said the economics of what they're asking for the property we'd probably have to do an 8 or 9 story building with significant density there to make the economics work. So at a minimum, we at least want to get that older housing stock renovated. It may not have the modern amenities, but at least it can have upgraded cabinets, kitchens, bathrooms, and everything. The one thing I did mention to this person, though, is that we also would really like to see fire safety sprinkler systems incorporated when possible in those buildings, because that continues to be not only a life safety issue, but also a public safety call issue for the city there. So any way that we can kind of help facilitate that and encourage that, I think is good for the community.
Is that part of the city of Fitchburg's?
We can't require that
You can't
anymore.
require, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We used to have it as a condition of sale, correct? What do we have on the books for major renovation work that's done in buildings?
We can't do that anymore, Dorothy. Some
I know the state made
actions at the
changes.
state, yeah. So it's really got to be more by encouragement, or, I guess that property is in a tax increment district right now, whether we would direct some resources, but the challenge there is if you're just renovating existing units, there's not necessarily new valuation and increment to then provide that payback stream home.
Mike, please let me know if your developers fall through, because I've just been reaching out to some on behalf of another community who've recently found a smaller multifamily property come up for sale that they want to redevelop. So
okay,
let me know.
we'll do that. Thanks, Olivia.
Yep, sure. So I think that is it for announcements, right?
Yes.
Are we done?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. It was great to see you. An excellent meeting. Thank you so much, Joyce and Mike, for putting this together. Lots of great information. And I guess, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
Did you get that? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Great. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. We'll see you in a few months. And Mike, if you wouldn't mind staying.